John Diamond, visiting us from Washington, D.C. John, thanks for being with us today.
Glad to be with you, Linda.
You're kind of a big deal.
I'd go with medium deal, but whatever you want to go with, that's fine with me.
Tell us about your background.
So I was a journalist for many years, starting out in Boston and then going to Washington in 1989, where I started covering national security and the Pentagon and the CIA and the State Department and Congress. And I did that for about 20 years and then peeled off to write a book about the CIA, which I've been covering for more than a decade. And since then I've had work in private consulting, and I've worked on Capitol Hill for a U.S. Senator.
So the book that you've published, The CIA and the Culture of Failure, when did you publish this?
So this came out in 2008, published by Stanford University Press, and it was came out. It was sort of a project that looked at the agency between the end of the Cold War and the start of the war in Iraq. So that was the period that it covered, and yeah.
What was it like in those days?
Well, the agency. Everybody thinks the agency is that U.S. intelligence and the CIA is super secret, and of course it is. But so much had gone on with the 9/11 attacks and the war in Iraq that there was a tremendous amount of public scrutiny on the intelligence community. And so that created an opportunity for journalists to really get a window into how it operated or how it sometimes dysfunctioned. And it created a lot of material for historians to work with, which is what I did.
What's one of your favorite stories in the book?
So I interviewed a CIA officer who was a senior analyst. Analysts mostly stick to Washington and work on incoming intelligence, but he decided to take a trip to Baghdad to get a first-hand look at what was going on. This was before Iraq invaded Kuwait back in 1990, and it was shortly before that. And he told the story about how once he got there, at that time we were supposedly on friendly terms with Iraq, but he was being followed around by secret police. The embassy personnel were being harassed. They were having their cars damaged.
Why?
Saddam and his regime were not trusting the United States at that time because he thought that we were playing both sides in the Iran-Iraq war, which we kind of were. And so he was taking a hostile posture towards us. So this caught the attention of the CIA officer and got him thinking that things weren't quite as stable as maybe he thought back from his desk in Washington.
Okay, so your book was written almost 10 years ago. Fast forward to today.
So the book covered a period from the end of the Cold War for the next dozen years or so, and that was a really down time for U.S. intelligence. The budget was going way down. People were retiring and not being replaced. All the Russia experts were leaving, or many of them, and there wasn't really a new clear-cut mission that was emerging. So it was a difficult time, and then this new threat, Al-Qaeda, emerged. U.S. intelligence was really slow to grasp
Why?
the severity of it. There was disagreement inside about what the nature of the terrorist threat was, and the main point that was missed was that the terrorist threat was directed at the U.S. homeland as opposed to being sort of a regional threat involving instability in the Middle East region. So that was one of the big failures, and also just the failure to kind of see the growth of Al-Qaeda and its sort of intentions. So, for example, Al-Qaeda the first major attack on the United States was back in 1998 at U.S. embassies in Tanzania and Kenya.
So the signs were already there.
And the date that attack happened was the date that U.S. troops arrived in the Persian Gulf back in 1990 for prior to the Persian Gulf War. So it was something that the terror groups were very focused on. In other words, opposition to our military presence in the region. And we were sort of not conscious of the intensity of feeling about that among these radical groups. So that was one thing.
Since the publishing of your book, The CIA and the Culture of Failure, it's been about 10 years. Catch us up to speed. What's been going on in the 10 years and bring us up to speed on the CIA?
So in short, the CIA has been getting a lot bigger, probably almost double in size. And whereas what I was writing about were intelligence failures, the intelligence community not doing enough, and CIA getting things wrong.
What does that mean? The CIA getting things wrong. What does that mean?
Well, the book gets into issues of the failure to really see the emergence of the Al-Qaeda threat.
Okay.
They came close to penetrating the 9/11 plot, but close was not quite good enough. And of course, the mistakes in connection with the weapons of mass destruction, which is a whole long story. What has been happening more recently has been questions about whether the intelligence community is doing too much, has become too powerful, too intrusive on the privacy of Americans, for example, overstepping the law in issues of whether they're conducting torture of prisoners, the issue of bulk collection of our phone data by the NSA, for example, has become very controversial. So the issues have been much more about, are they doing too much? Have they gotten too powerful? Are they out of control? Whereas during the period I'm writing about, it's are they finding out what they need to find out to keep us safe?
Now, last question for you. We're both from Boston.
Right?
Boston has seen its share of trouble with the marathon. Do you think that could have been prevented had systems been in place?
Well, these cases that come up of terrorism where it's homegrown, where you have people that are here legally, whether they're U.S. born or whether they've immigrated legally, it's very difficult. And this is really emerging as one of the big challenges in U.S. intelligence. It's not about keeping the bad guys out so much. It's not about another 9/11 scenario where the terrorists parachute in and conduct a plot. The concern is domestic homegrown terrorism, which is what we had here. Now, I believe one of the marathon bombers was to some extent known to the authorities. He had said and done things that had gotten the attention of authorities.
So he was already on their radar.
Already on the radar, but it's so difficult to go from somebody being kind of on the list of people to keep an eye on to really intervening and preventing them from doing something. It just takes a level of surveillance and manpower that no intelligence organization, whether here or as we've seen in Europe, has the capability to do that. We've seen again and again, tragically in France, where people who were really quite well known to the police, definitely on the list of radicals and so forth, just not doing enough overtly or getting caught at it to get themselves arrested. So, our legal system has to do with arresting people and putting them on trial after they've committed crimes. And of course, counterterrorism is all about preventing the crime from happening in the first place. It's a totally different endeavor.
What would you like us to keep in mind?
I guess the big change in U.S. intelligence from the end of the Cold War to now. During the Cold War, we were looking at enemy states, the Soviet Union, China, big armies, big governments, spy versus spy. That still goes on for sure in U.S. intelligence. But on top of that, there's now this immense operation trying to find individual people, obscure people, people who aren't famous. They're not officials. They're underground. They're terrorists, radicals, and they could be here in the U.S. or anywhere in the world, really. So the scale of the endeavor is just so much greater. It's really much more of a needle in a haystack kind of job than it used to be back in the day.